Welcome to Workforces. I'm Julian Alssid.
And I'm Kaitlin LeMoine, and we speak with the innovators who shape the future of work and learning.
Together, we unpack the complex elements of workforce and career preparation and offer practical solutions that can be scaled and sustained.
Workforces is supported by Lumina Foundation. Lumina is an independent private foundation in Indianapolis that is committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available to all. Let's dive in. So, Julian, for years we've been helping clients navigate the messy intersection of work and learning, and using and interpreting labor market data has been essential to help inform and guide the direction and decision making of various stakeholders, ranging from business and industry to higher ed and training providers.
It's true, Caitlin, but early on, data tools were limited. Government data lags, which made it hard to keep up with the pace of change. And the tools available were also challenging to use or interpret, which made it difficult to adopt the use of this data across whole teams and organizations. And often data analysis was housed under one person or in a small analytics shop, which further limited ongoing use by the individuals charged with educating and training and hiring. And, to compound this all further, students and workers were even further removed from labor market data and related trends.
And that's why the work of our guest today is so critical. Matt Sigelman, president of the Burning Glass Institute, has dedicated his career to unlocking new avenues for mobility, opportunity, and equity through skills. He and his team created the field of real-time labor market data, a breakthrough innovation which has transformed how we understand and navigate the world of work.
Matt's work has cracked the code of an increasingly dynamic labor market, tracking demand for tens of thousands of skills across 30 countries. Before launching the Burning Glass Institute, he was CEO and then chairman of Lightcast for over 20 years and worked at McKinsey & Company and Capital One. Matt also currently serves as a senior advisor at the Harvard Project on the Workforce and is founder of the elementary school, Mainline Classical Academy, is it? He writes widely on the job market and is consulted frequently by public officials and the global media.
Matt, welcome to Workforces. We're so excited to have you with us today.
It's great to be together. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Well, so as we jump into the conversation today, can you please tell us a bit about your background and your current role at the Burning Glass Institute?
As you pointed out, I spent 20 years before starting the Burning Glass Institute, building what's now come to be called Lightcast. What a lot of people don't realize is that Lightcast started not as a data company, but as a job matching company. We built an engine for first being able to read people's resumes and then to be able to what they call resume parsing and then to be able to match them to jobs. And it was a successful little business. And we wound up doing a lot of work in state and local workforce systems, providing them the matching engines that were used to be able to support clients in connecting them with work. And this was around kind of the start of the Great Recession, when suddenly a lot of workforce agencies found themselves inundated with people, many of whom weren't traditional kinds of workforce system customers, people who were professionals or from a wide array of occupations. And we had this great engine, and what we realized though is that it could only work well if it could connect people with jobs, if there had to be jobs for them to be able to be connected to. And what, of course, your listeners who work in workforce systems know is that employers haven't always been so forthcoming in connecting and putting their jobs in front of workforce systems. And so what we essentially had was this Ferrari engine plucked down inside a Yugo. Right? It could search across the 100 jobs that happened to be listed on what effectively was an online bulletin board in a workforce center. And so what occurred to us is that we were solving the wrong problem. We were solving a one-on-one matching problem. That is to say, how do I match Matt with a specific job? But so much of the problem that we have in workforce development and economic development, in policy, but also in the world of education and employers as well, is a planning problem. It's not a one-on-one matching; it's a problem. It's a population genetics problem, right? Like, how do you connect this group of people with these kinds of jobs? Because that's when you can start to plan. And so we started scratching our heads and saying, why is that not happening? And what we realized is the same reason why our matching engine was constrained, the fact that there weren't a lot of jobs in one place, was the same reason that a lot of that planning wasn't happening. And so we said, well, gee, this is strange. Right now, pretty much most job postings, and I think this was largely true then, it's certainly a lot more true, but 17 years later today, that pretty much most job postings across, whether you're talking about very entry level jobs, whether you're talking about highly skilled professional jobs, are posted online. And so instead of having to rely on employers to come to you, you could actually go and just scrape their jobs. And so we built a whole system of spiders to crawl the web and bring back what ultimately became millions of job postings every day. But our ambition, again, was not so much to create a bigger database for a matching service. Our ambition really quickly became to be able to say, what do those jobs say? How can they help us plan more effectively so that we're not leaving people, leaving training, leaving policy at the mercy of the spot market, where it's like, okay, what jobs happen to be available today? But instead, to be able to think ahead and say, hey, what's the training that we're going to need to be? What are the programs that we're going to need to invest in? So what we did is we started to develop all these coding engines to be able to make sense make sense of and interpret all the jobs that we're bringing back. And that was sort of the birth of what people have come to refer to as the real-time labor market industry. And it's evolved greatly since then. And I'm proud of the work that Lycast and others are doing to continue to advance those data. I left that 3 years ago. And I left it because as powerful as the data are, I came to realize that a lot of what's missing is the ability, is the translation and transformation layers. How do we use these data to affect fundamental transformations? And a lot of that really isn't necessarily about the data themselves. It's not about software, but it's about working together with stakeholders in the field and solving things very experimentally, because a lot of these big problems, the big thorny problems that we're all trying to solve, well, inherently they haven't been solved yet. So the Institute is a fully independent nonprofit data laboratory to advance research and practice at the intersection of the future of work and the future of learning, where our goal is to undertake the kinds of experiments that advance economic mobility, that build community prosperity, and that ensure that we're seeing better outcomes for workers and learners.
It's great, Matt, to hear you tell the story, and kind of I've known you and really followed you through all of this process, and glad that you're now at the intersection of work and learning and trying to help solve these thorny problems. What are some of the trends that you're seeing now, and at that intersection, and in particular areas of research that you're really excited about and are kind of looking to further unpack?
So when I think about the intersection of work and learning, what's shaping the imperative there and shaping the greatest sets of transformations is the level of dynamism and skills. We're used to thinking about a labor market that's denominated by jobs. And a lot of the prognostication that we see is about jobs going away, new jobs being born. What we see instead is that the greatest changes are happening at the layer of skills. What are the skills that it takes to land a job? What are the skills that get accrued within a job? And what's the dynamism that's reshaping those skills? That's really important because the skills affect not only what it takes to get a job, but they affect how you get your next job. You think about a job transition, you're essentially taking the skills that you just learned and you're moving from job to job. And what we're seeing is a tremendous rate of skill change. People often talk about a half-life of skills. Listeners won't be surprised to hear that half-life is quickening and quickening, quickly. Um, we did some work a few years ago with our colleagues at BCG, where we found that the average job has seen 37% of its skills replaced in just the prior 5 years. And that was before generative AI. So here's the thing about it, though. When we think about that pace of skill change, we really sort of assume it's about technology change. And there's certainly no small amount of that, but the greater set of changes are actually about skills blending from across domains. Think about a field like marketing. We all know people in marketing. They tend to be very nice people because they went into marketing because they know how to talk to people. So you have right brain people, and all of a sudden marketing is becoming a data-driven sport. So you have right brain people who need to be able to use left brain skills. Not hard to find marketing people, but try finding a marketing person with SQL skills, and the job becomes much harder to fill. It comes, starts to command big salary premiums. So we're seeing that kind of phenomenon around the market. Here's why I talk about that as the key imperative shaping the intersection of work and learning. Because what it says is that a educational model of once and done learning. You go to high school, maybe you go to college, and then you sort of never look back and go and step into your career. A model like that was already challenged is increasingly broken or perhaps risible. At minimum, I think you could say it's inadequate. Maybe that was a more polite way of saying it. So what it says is that there's 165 million US workers in the workforce, and the vast majority of them are in a position where they need to be able to acquire new skills, and they need to be able to acquire new skills on the fly. Mm-hmm. And we need an infrastructure for that. The logical infrastructure that we have, things like our workforce system, is tremendously underinvested. Think about the scope of workforce investment monies that actually get allocated toward skill training. You're talking about a few $100 million out of a couple billion of total WIOA funds a year. You think about our community colleges, which are slightly better funded, but the vast majority of, or at least significant majority of community college enrollments right now are into what are called degree transfer programs and not to workforce training. And so we really are leaving people to navigate their transitions without much guidance and without the resources to acquire the learning that enables them to move up, that gives them a greater chance of making sure that each of those transition is an opportunity for greater economic mobility. The average U.S. worker right now will see 12 career transitions over the course of her career, and each of those transitions is an opportunity to either move up or to stay put or perhaps even fall back. And right now we are not helping people systematically to discover what are the skills that will help them move up. What are the skills that are in demand that will allow them to command a premium? What are the skills that will prepare them for the future? And even if we help them discover those skills, we don't provide them with an infrastructure to acquire them. So, that says to me that there's a whole big space around lifelong learning. It has implications for higher ed because right now higher ed has largely surrendered that space to online players. And I think there's a big opportunity for colleges and universities at a time that they're seeing enrollments thin. It also has implications for how we think about non-degree credentials and what it takes to make them successful.
I think that what you've said about kind of this moment of both the reality that the skills are changing very, very quickly, right? And what's needed as far as the half life of kind of like what's most up to date as far as job relevant skills is shifting more and more quickly, kind of at the same moment as perhaps we're all needing to rethink what does it look like to keep up to speed. I guess I'm wondering like whose job is this to figure this out, right? Because it feels like it's both on the it maybe lives with the individual, it might live with employers, it certainly could live with uh, higher ed and training institutions, but only if learners are going to them. So kind of how do we think about, how we all work to solve this challenge? It's a really, really big one that you're raising here.
So I'm so glad you raised this question. There's right now no shortage of dysfunction in the market. For the most part, what we have is a system in which the responsibility for navigation rests with individuals themselves, with individual workers and learners. And that's a problem because individual workers lack information, they lack counseling, and they lack liquidity, both financial liquidity and time liquidity. They lack the financial liquidity to be able to invest in training and the time liquidity to be able to have the time to do it.
Or even be aware that they need to do it, right?
Exactly. And so if you sort of think about where there would be logic in this, there'd be a lot of logic in employers investing. There'd be a lot of logic in the public investing in this. But both are encumbered right now by issues of cost, time, and risk. We've got employers who, whether logically or not, wind up getting obsessed with what economists call free rider problems, right? I've got a workforce that's likely to turn over very quickly, and it's true that in a lot of roles, retention is historically low. And so, why should I, as an employer, invest in training somebody who's likely to be leaving? Now, there's all sorts of good logic for why they should, but regardless, you can understand the perception of how it's hard for an employer to get a return on investment when the time duration of their return is likely to be so low. But it doesn't change the fact that employers are the ones who are in the best position to signal to their employees, right? You would want an employer to say, "Hey, Matt, I'm struggling to fill these jobs up here, and I think you could fill them. I want to pay you more. Here's the learning that I want you to take on. Here's the training I'm going to invest in you to get." The public has significant stake in this as well. As we think about, kind of our modern Sputnik moments in our global contest for economic competitiveness, as we try to navigate an increasingly fraught geopolitical environment, the ability to be able to have a highly skilled workforce working in the kind of sectors that we think are going to be most important means that we need to have the opportunities to invest. But here too, I think we're struggling with issues of cost on the one side, of planning on the other, which is a time question. How do we predict where those changes are going to be and what the sequence of those changes is going to be? And so as a result, what we have, and by the way, educators likewise are either asleep at the switch in the sense that they're not offering the kinds of programs that are oriented towards selling degrees. And they also, where they are trying to promote things, are trying to promote their programs. They're self-interested, not surprisingly. I think here's where we can change this dysfunction, and I've been lucky to be collaborating with a group of 30 people in a project at Stanford right now, being led by Mitchell Stevens, where we're really trying to say what would the new economics of learning be if you were trying to think about moving from an educated society where education happens at the start of a career to a learning society where learning happens throughout a career. I think you can imagine sets of structures that allow us to both reduce risk through more effective information sharing, through better signaling, but also to share risk. You can imagine financial structures, for example, where if an employer invests in an employee and training an employee, and the employee leaves, that the employer gets a tax credit regardless of whether the employee is still at the firm, proportionate to the amount somebody's income rises, which, by the way, is something you could fund out of the greater tax revenues that you get when people are earning more. So there's structures that we could put in place that would allow us to reduce risk, having better labor market information systems, having better mechanisms for employers to share data on the training that they're investing into their workers, having better assessments of credentials, are all mechanisms that we can put in place, and some of which we're trying to advance at the institute.
I almost feel like we haven't even gotten to AI yet. So speaking of which, as AI is sort of rapidly, permeating all, how do you see how do you see it impacting today and the future of work and learning, short and long term, and kind of the construct you're laying out for us?
So there's a couple of effects that we've been studying. One that I've been working on together with Mike Fenlon, who was formerly the Chief Human Resources Officer at PwC, and with Joe Fuller, a professor at Harvard Business School and a colleague on the Harvard project on the workforce. And what we've been looking at is how AI is going to reshape learning curves. It turns out, what we found from our research, that a lot of the impacts that we've been sort of thinking about as impacts on jobs or on tasks are really about how AI shifts expertise, how much expertise is required to get into a job, and how expertise gets accrued over the course of a job. Essentially, what's the shape of a learning curve? And what we find is that there are some kinds of jobs where learning curves tend to be relatively flat, where there's a fair amount of skill that's required to get into a job. But once you get into a job, productivity remains fairly constant, no matter the level of experience that you accrue. Think about the job of a bus driver, for example. Maybe not a great example because it's probably not going to be particularly impacted by AI, but just as an example of a job with a flat learning curve. Those jobs are worth, by the way, sort of paying attention to, because those are jobs where the hypothesis that we sometimes hear about how AI is going to be the worker's best friend, they're going to democratize knowledge, they're going to help overcome barriers to access. Those are the kinds of jobs where that's likely to be the case. Where essentially you needed domain expertise to get in, you needed language proficiency, whatever it was. But once you've got that, you can do that job. And so I think those are going to be places where we may in fact see AI reduce the level of expertise that's needed. But there's a lot of other jobs where what you see is a pretty steep learning curve over time. And what that says is that expertise is accrued over time. That productivity rises over time. And what you can then do is look at the differences in skills that are required at the entry level versus for somebody who's highly experienced in the domain. And in many of those kinds of jobs, what you see is the AI impacts are the AI overlaps are much more pronounced at the entry level. That says in big parts of the economy, the entry level opportunity landscape is going to dwindle. Think about what that means, both for people who are educating and training people, and what it means on the other side for employers. For educators, it says, what does it mean to train people to start their careers in the middle, as opposed to at the beginning? when people are going to need that much more proficiency, when we're already struggling to make effective connections between education and work. And now we need to raise the bar. That's a critical challenge. On the other hand, think about what this means for an employer, where whole organizations right now are shaped around the idea that you hire a whole bunch of people on the entry level, and over time that field narrows itself, and a few people get, at each stage kept promoted up. And so you have organizational structures that are essentially pyramid in shaped. Now all of a sudden you're thinking about diamond shaped organizations where you really don't need a lot of people at the entry level. Okay, fair enough. But how do you get talent when your whole pipeline has always depended on having lots of entry level people who are getting early experiences and through those experiences becoming expert? So that's one of the AI impacts that we've been thinking a lot about. We have another branch of research we've been looking at, as you might imagine. We spend a lot of time thinking about skills, and so we've been trying to not only translate a lot of the early models of AI impacts, which are about tasks, into skills. What's the capabilities that people need in order to do work in an AI era? But specifically trying to intermediate this tug of war between, is AI going to automate work or augment work? And so, it's sort of like the taste great, less filling of our age. I think the three of us are all old enough to remember that. I don't know if our listeners are, but in any case, there's been, when you think about skills, are some of these skills going to get replaced, or is AI going to help us do them better? And so we've developed a set of data models to help us sort of think through this. And here's the fascinating thing. We approach this as trying to intermediate a tug of war. And a funny thing happened. What we found was that some of the same skills showed up atop both of our models. In other words, we were saying, here's, take a given skill, and it's the top of most likely to get automated away, and top of the most likely to get augmented by AI. And so first we looked at, we were like, okay, we screwed something up royally, because we were trying to intermediate this battle, and exactly. And then when we looked into it, what we realized is there are sets of skills. Think about, as an example, data analysis, where AI increases our efficiency and it increases our effectiveness. And those kinds of skills are going to be a new power skills for the 21st century. And so we've been thinking a lot about how do we make sure that everyone has those new power skills. Interestingly enough, even things like writing are among those new power skills. The exercise of writing looks very different in an AI era, but the ability to craft narrative, to shape logic, actually become more important, not less, because that's how we leverage AI effectively. And then finally, as we think about AI and its both the disruptions that it portends, but also the opportunities that it opens, again, we've been thinking about skills. So if you start again with this idea that AI is going to change the skills that are required in a given job because some of the skills are no longer needed, other skills become more important. And then put that alongside something which I said earlier in our conversation, that the way right now you get from job to job is by building on the skills that you've been using and bridging the gaps, and using that to be able to step across to a new job. Well, wait a second. If the skills that you're using in any given job are going to be different, what it means is that your next job, the transitions, the pathways by which people move from job to job actually get totally reshaped as well. Think about, I'll give you an example. Right now, in the world of machining, you go from being a machinist to being a computer numerical controlled press operator to being a CNC programmer. Well, you can imagine that the distance between some of those may become, for example, the distance from being a machinist to being a programmer may actually, get compressed as CNC programming becomes easier to do. On the other hand, what that may mean is that a ladder that might have existed between CNC programming and actual software development and computer programming may get pulled further apart. So, it doesn't mean that the transitions are no longer available, but there'll be different transitions. And so the kind of training that we've been used to providing to help people bridge gaps is going to need to be rethought.
Circling back, what you just said connects back to something I feel like that you had said earlier, and I was really intrigued by regarding, this notion that through AI, really access, and frankly, I guess it's true of the internet in some cases too, just that the access to knowledge is ever present, right? Like the ability to rapidly obtain information about any topic is it's kind of limitless, and what that means for that kind of diamond shaped job market, I think is really fascinating, and it's really intriguing to me, like what happens when knowledge might be ever present, but the skills needed to be engaging at that next level up are things like communication, conflict resolution, negotiation, right? Skills that are
Yes.
perhaps that can't be honed with AI alone. And so what you just said about like the gap between, or how you bridge the gaps between these skills might look and feel really different, I feel like that's where we're headed now. Is what does it look like? And I don't have the answer, but this is one thing I've been wrestling with, is what does it look like to build training models and education models that help people, kind of get to that next level a little earlier with those other skills beyond the knowledge acquisition component. I don't know if that rings true to you, Matt, but that's just been on my mind.
Absolutely. Two things that I'll say there. One, I've been thinking a lot recently about artificial intelligence and human intelligence, and how, in a lot of ways, they're almost exactly opposite each other. AI is, what we're seeing with generative AI in particular is that Gen AI is phenomenally powerful as a pattern recognition engine. And the human brain is a powerful pattern recognition engine as well. But here's why it's worth distinguishing them. Generative AI works by just sort of crunching tremendous amounts of data and looking for the patterns within those data. And so in a lot of ways, it's totally agnostic to content. It's just crunching through it and seeing the relationships. And eventually, if you put enough into it, it can find patterns and relationships. Again, the human brain is a great pattern recognition machine as well. But think about how your brain works. Your brain's not actually sort of chewing through every relationship that it could possibly look for. Your brain works exactly opposite. What we're really, really good at is filtering, is being able to very quickly, almost immediately, seeing the most salient relationships. The human brain works by constructing narrative. I can give you a picture, and you will immediately zoom in on the most salient thing in that picture, the thing that's most unusual, because you can see the story. And I think when we kind of see those kinds of differences, we understand the difference between generative AI and human intelligence, we can understand how the two can complement each other, and what kinds of domains will be most complementary.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
It really feels a bit like what you're saying is we need to do what we do really well, but understand how to work with the technology.
That means as well that we need to have the ability, we need to have both sets of abilities.
Yeah.
I keep hearing I keep hearing people say, well, gee, we're not going to need to code anymore because generative AI is going to do it for us, or we're not going to need to do data analytics because generative AI is going to do it for us. We will need fewer specialists, but actually, many more of us will need coding skills. Many more of us will need data analytics skills. The analogy I would offer here is Microsoft Excel, which in a way sort of automated some of the work that kind of ledger accountants did and the like. Think about all the ways that we each use data today, whether it's to create charts, whether it's to, build a discounted cash flow analysis, whatever it may be. And think about what that would have been like to do without Excel. The answer is you wouldn't have done it. And so many more of us are using data today than we could have done 40 years ago, precisely because we have that automation that's available to us. So whenever you hear someone say, hey, we're not going to need to know how to code, it's just flat out wrong. We need to make sure that we're building those kinds of basic proficiencies across the workforce, even if many fewer of us may need to be dedicated software developers.
So I feel like you're taking us in this direction through your last comment there, Matt. But one thing we like to ask on this show, given that it's called Workforces, is really a question about really what are your recommendations for how our audience can become forces in navigating or helping others to navigate career progression and advancement in what we've discussed here today as a really a shifting, ever-changing landscape.
The key to that, Kaitlin, is in the words you just used, which is progression. We tend to think about jobs, and particularly those of our listeners who are supporting workers and learners in making effective transitions. Getting to that next job is such a often a big challenge, and it feels like a big triumph in and of itself. And I think a lot of what I would recommend is that we give more attention to the downstream consequences of each job. How do jobs connect to one another? One of the things that we've done at the Institute is we've built a database of 65 million U.S. workers' career histories. Represents about 40% of the U.S. workforce. And it's given us a very powerful way of understanding the twists, turns, and tangles that run through people's careers. Essentially, the cow paths that lead from one job to the next. And what it's given us a really good sense for is how much variance there is, how easy it is for people to get stuck on the one hand, but also how proximate people often are to jobs that lead to much greater opportunity. One of the things that I've often heard from people in the workforce field, and that depresses me no end, is that people with college degrees have careers and people who don't have jobs. And the reason why it upsets me so much is that the difference to me between a job and a career is that a career has a directionality to it. It has a vector. It has momentum. We recently did a report where we analyzed the careers of several million people who went straight from high school to work. And we looked at what happened to them over 20 years. And what we were able to see, is that there are very predictable paths to success. First of all, we found that it's true you don't need to go to college to have a good career. We found that the top 20% of people who go straight to work after high school wind up out-earning the median college graduate. But on the other hand, and we found that certain first jobs, we called launchpad jobs, make you literally 4 times more likely to wind up as a top earner by the time you're 40. But we also found that there are some kinds of first jobs that make you 4 times more likely to wind up in or close to poverty. And here's the thing that, again, is most important to bear in mind. Many of those good starts and many of the bad starts actually look the same. They pay the same. And so think about what that means for somebody who's coming out of high school. They're saying, okay, well, I could wind up seating people at a restaurant and making $23,000 a year, or I can wind up as a cook in the back and make $24,000 a year, which is slightly more. And one of those kids, the former, will be making, if you sort of follow all the different directions that happen over their career, on average, will be making over $70,000 a year by the time they're 40, and the other one making in the low 30s. And we are providing no good insight into that. So that ability to think not just about the next job, but about what happens after that job and what are the skills that will prepare somebody to make that next transition is, I think, one of the biggest transformations that we can have as workforce professionals.
Wow, man, it's been just incredible hearing your download on all these multiple aspects to what we're seeing now and bring some clarity to the landscape. How can people follow your work? And I know you've touched on several different reports and research projects. What's, just as we wind down, we'd like to leave people with, good actionable info.
Well, I hope people will visit our website, burningglassinstitute.org, all one word. And there's a place where you can sign up to join our mailing list, and we keep people abreast of the research that's coming out.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today. This has really been a masterclass.
Yes, thank you so much for talking about the different directions of your research.
So enjoyed this.
That's all we have for you today. Thank you for listening to Workforces. We hope that you take away nuggets that you can use in your own work. Thank you to our sponsor, Lumina Foundation. We are also grateful to our wonderful producer, Dustin Ramsdell. You can listen to future episodes at workforces.info or on Apple, Amazon, and Spotify. Please subscribe, like, and share the podcast with your colleagues and friends.